I'm done. I am done. I am finished with seeing this misinformed, mistranslated, unacknowledgeable set of information claiming that Chainsaw Man is coming to a conclusion. I want to start this off by saying one very prominent thing. None of this has been confirmed. Fujimoto himself has not said anything about it. There has been no editors within Jump that have claimed this to be a thing, yet an abundance of people, not only within the community, but on Twitter, that have large followings have echoed this idea of a quote-unquote super climax. That is the only words that have been given towards Chainsaw Man, not in the context of the story ending, just super climax. Now I understand that seeing words like that is quite alarming. Super climax does indeed sound like the story is coming to a conclusion, but if you haven't read the story, if you haven't indulged within Chainsaw Man's narrative at all, and you continue to echo this very misinformed response, other people are going to latch onto that and spread this, which is the reason why Chainsaw Man is coming to a conclusion has spread like wildfire, without literally no confirmation whatsoever. Even some of the bigger people that have connections to Jump, that have large followings to echo it too, have actually come out and apologized for claiming stuff like this to be legitimate, or at least indirectly implying so it could be misinterpreted. Nothing has been confirmed, and I cannot stress that enough. The words super climax does not mean the story is coming to a conclusion. If anything, it's actually extremely fitting for Chainsaw Man. Trust me, I understand that seeing those words and attaching them to the most recent arc could easily seem like it's coming to an end. This arc has definitely been constructed in a way where it seems as big and glamorous as a final arc. However, there is so many bits and pieces within this arc that completely contradict that statement. And I am 100% confident in my mind that there is no way that Fujimoto, who is the author, could correctly and accurately end this story on a extremely well done note with 5 to 10 chapters remaining, which is what people are claiming. I'm not too sure where they get those numbers from. I assume it's just an estimate. It's impossible to end it that quickly with something well received. And the very reason I frame it that way is because Fujimoto could end this story whenever he wanted. Realistically, he does not have to write the best ending to ever exist or an ending that even works. If he wanted to end a next chapter, he could. It would probably be the worst ending that you could imagine, but it's definitely a possibility. That's always in the back of my mind, that if he got bored with the story, or if he didn't want to write it anymore, or something came up where he had to end the story prematurely, he could do it. And I do acknowledge his history with Fire Punch. Now, I personally haven't read Fire Punch yet, but that's where a lot of the connection has gone back to. He ended that prematurely, maybe because he was bored of it or something along those lines. And from that, I assume a comment that he made surrounding Fire Punch and stating that he didn't like writing long stories. So Fire Punch's ending being rather abrupt and probably not the best thing, at least from what I've heard from people. You could easily connect that to Chainsaw Man, and maybe he wants to do something similar, but the way he has handled this recent arc completely contradicts everything that people have been echoing. The 5 to 10 chapters don't reiterate that nonsense. The only way he could end this in 5 to 10 chapters is if he genuinely doesn't care about the ending of his story, which is entirely fine, that's up to him. But thinking that it could legitimately and properly end within 5 to 10 chapters is very far from being a possibility. The handful of things that he has introduced that are cohesive ties, meaning that he has implemented these elements or concepts within his story so he can play on them in the future. These are important to understand. These aren't just concepts implemented to be played upon within that moment, they are implemented to grow over time and give some sort of direction and guidance for the future so you could line it all up towards the end. He has added a handful of these things. Think of them as seeds being planted within the ground so they can slowly grow over time and be directly and indirectly referenced and played upon throughout the narrative until that perfect time is right for it to bloom and spread its wings and be played upon right at the ending of the story. So when you're at the conclusion, you can look back and realize 100 chapters ago, this was actually introduced, the idea for it was implemented, and only now is it being directly played upon. It's been referenced for over those recent 100 chapters, but only now are we seeing the results for it. There is a multiple amount of cohesive ties, and the reason why cohesive ties are important, and you will see this within every single narrative, is that they give people direction. They give the readers guidance and some sort of a hindsight on what to expect within the future. It is legitimately pointless to add these very vital and important ties within your narrative if you're deciding to end it within 10 to 15 chapters. It makes no sense whatsoever. If he legitimately wanted to end his story, he wouldn't have added these things, because these things have already given people the impression that it's going to last a lot longer, especially with how they are openly introduced and what they actually reference. These are things that carry out all the way to the end of the narrative, potentially being the final things we see within the story. The first biggest one we got was Makima's reveal. Everything surrounding her goals, what she's truly capable of, what she is directly, what she actually is in terms of a devil, and how those goals intertwine with the other cohesive ties that get played upon. Introducing goals for Makima wanting to 1. Control Chainsaw Man, 2. Using Chainsaw Man to take on the 4 Horsemen of Apocalypse, and 3. Her wanting to obliterate the 4 Horsemen of Apocalypse and erase them from history so people don't have to suffer from the likes of war, famine, death, etc. There would be no reason to add these things if your story was ending. These are extremely important. It's a massive reveal. This in itself pushes the story forward. Now wait, hold on, there's more. The 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse themselves were introduced separately. They weren't actually introduced with Makima's goal. We found out a little bit after it. And the 4 Horsemen seem to be extremely powerful. Chainsaw Man has versed them before and he got obliterated. It seems like he put up a good fight, but it's something that he wasn't capable of defeating yet. These 4 Horsemen aren't going to be instant kills or stuff that he can just obliterate through. They're going to be a very difficult battle. Ultimately, you can see them as being the final fights of the story. They would make the most sense and have the most climatic pressure leading up towards it. So all of that in itself already lengthens out the story quite a bit. But hold on, there's actually more. Power. The situation with Power as of recently, if you've read the newest chapter, is a cohesive tie. It's one that is extremely important and one that actually has to be played upon. It was very emotional, it's very empowering, and it does an incredible job in building Power and understanding her, but also understanding Denji. The fact that Power and Denji's conversation and the emotional goodbye directly parallels Denji's and Pochita's conversation at the beginning of the story, it's something that means a lot. So when she too forces Denji into a contract to come and find her within hell and turn her back into power, you know that's going to be played upon. That's a cohesive tie. These are only some of the most obvious things that have been introduced within this arc that have been ever so slightly played upon and opened up so they can be utilized and be powerful within the future. This stuff being introduced only for the story to end in 5 to 10 chapters makes no sense to me, and once again leads me all the way back to the idea of people having this very weird understanding of the word super climax. I don't blame people for it, but how the response for it has been handled hasn't been very good. It's been very poor, and now a lot of people genuinely think Chainsaw Man is coming to a conclusion, when in reality the only way it could conclude is if Fujimoto himself genuinely just doesn't want to do the story anymore and is going to leave all of these cohesive story ties that lengthen his story out for quite a bit of time up in the air. If that was the case, there is a very high chance, a very massive percent, that the ending that you will get will not be good, because there is way too many things that have been introduced only just recently, even in the most recent chapter, that can only be concluded with time. Not to mention, on top of all of this, the primordial fears. We've seen one. There is meant to be an abundance of others. Do you still think the story is coming to a conclusion? If anything, what this arc has told me is that Fujimoto is extremely impressive when it comes to writing his arcs, and with how massive and grand they truly get, people are going to misinterpret that as it being a final arc. That's a pretty massive achievement to get, that your arc is so incredibly over the top and powerful that it seems like a final arc of a manga, when in reality it's probably just the first one. I should also mention that the rumored 3 arcs that Chainsaw Man was meant to have, the big 3 arcs, is that only of a rumor. We do not know how legitimate that is, and I tried to look up more information for it, and the only thing that I could find and direct it back to is that Fujimoto himself himself said it at Jump Fest at one time. How legitimate that is, I'm not entirely sure, so take it with a grain of salt. But with how this story is most likely going to unfold, with what has been introduced, the primordial fears, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, Makima's goals, as well as power and her resurrection, 3 massive arcs focusing on a lot of different things, sounds pretty accurate, especially if they're anywhere between 50 to 100 chapters each. That somewhat adds another 100 to 200 plus chapters, depending on how long those arcs could be. Look, I understand people are nervous. I understand you potentially are nervous and anxious and want to know more about what is going to happen with Chainsaw Man. Can I promise that Fujimoto is going to continue his story? No, I can't. But I can promise you that everything that you have seen so far regarding Chainsaw Man ending has been misinformation. There has been no confirmation of it ending whatsoever. And the only way it can legitimately end in 5 to 10 chapters is if Fujimoto himself does not want to write this story anymore and does not care about anything that he has introduced over the past 20, 30 to 50 odd chapters. He will break and destroy his story because he has introduced things that take time to build upon, that take time to add emphasis and power towards, only for it to be played upon towards the end. It's the whole point. It's the purpose. I am more than confident from a writing perspective that it is going to continue. What I'm not confident on is how Fujimoto feels towards his own narrative. That's entirely up to him. And I can't blame him if he does want to end it in 5 to 10 chapters. That's perfectly fine. So please, before you spread this information, give it some sort of context. Don't echo it baselessly. Don't echo it because you've seen someone else say it. Give your own context and your own thoughts behind it so people can understand that none of this is legitimate as of yet. There is no confirmation for it. So that is basically it. Let me know what you think is going to happen to Chainsaw Man. After everything that I've just talked about, do you still think it's going to end in 5 to 10 chapters? What do you feel like the story has to cover before it reaches its conclusion? How many chapters do you feel like it has left? Or how many chapters do you feel like it needs to have to reach some sort of positive and well-constructed conclusion? I'd love to hear your thoughts. But I want to thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Drink plenty of water, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.